I'm Bob Mejer. I'm in the Quincy University print studio, and today I want to share with you my working method of making a non-toxic, water-based monotype oscillograph. The idea occurred to me way back in 1979. I was trying to figure out how to encourage my students to experience the fun of printmaking, and I was trying to encourage my printmakers the fun of doing direct watercolor painting. So at that time in '79, I thought, well, watercolor can be reconstituted. So to test my theory, I went back to the studio, and using watercolors and what I know about drawing and painting and printmaking, I made a test plate. So over here is my test plate using all the techniques I'm aware of with watercolors. So I have salt, I have sponge stampings, I have cardboard stampings, I have alcohol droppings, I have fingerprints, I have a roller, and there's what we call the additive light field technique represented here on the top row, and then the dark field technique where you subtract from a dark field is in the bottom row. And so this is the first printing using the additive and light field subtracted dark field methods of doing a monotype. And then there's always a second printing, some of the residuals left. So on this paper here, we have a residual or a ghost image of this first printing. So knowing that, then I decided to set up projects with my students and try to get both students from both courses integrated into trying this water-based method. There's products that I use. I use the straight tube watercolors. That's how I started out. And then eventually I found a wonderful product by Createx called Monotype Colors. It's mostly pigmented paint, and it's water. It loves water, and I'll show you more of that as we go on. Then the question is, what's a monotype? Basically, a monotype is one-of-a-kind print. You can only make one of them. No others are in existence. Some people think of monoprint as being a monotype, but there is a distinction. Monoprint means that there is a fixed matrix on the plate that can be repeated over and over again. So think of it as a scratch on the plate, and that scratch will always be there each time. When you work with monotypes, you want to think about the 8 Ps. And with the 8 Ps, I have this chart here. The first thing you want to have is a non-porous surface for the plate. So I've tried all kinds of surfaces. I've printed off of frosted mylar. I've printed off of cardboard. I've printed off of Luan plywood. I've printed off of litho plates, and I've even printed off newsprint paper. But my love is the plexiglass plate because it's transparent. And the beauty of the transparent plate, it cleans up well. You could put a drawing underneath it as a guide, or you can draw on the back as a guide as you paint on top of the surface. Remember, though, that it prints in reverse. So there always is that surprise element of the monotype, seeing it in reverse. I don't use white paint. As a watercolor, so I like to use the white of the paper. So my white paint is the white paper. So I use plexiglass, and I sand it with a sanding block, which is this sanding block here, and I give it a tooth so it would hold the pigment. And I also file the edges of the plexiglass about a 45-degree angle, so when I put paper over it, it won't rip the paper. And the paper would just bend over the edge, and it gives you a nice plate mark so you know that it's a print and not just a direct painting. Printed color is always different than painted color on regular paper, so that's important to know. The second part is anything that's water-based can be used in the monotype process. So as I mentioned, I use tube watercolors. I have Da Vinci tubes, I have Grumbacher, I have Winsor Newton. I use a lot of Daniel Smith's. But you want an artist brand because it's highly pigmented and it doesn't have fillers, okay? Same with the Createx. It's highly pigmented, doesn't have any fillers. It's intense colors, won't fade. It's not gray, and it's finely mixed. The pigment's finely mixed into this brand. So I use a combination of those. I also use All Stabilo water-based crayons for drawing. They're water-based, so the theory I had back then is since watercolor can be reconstituted, all you need is to let the pigment dry, then use a damp sheet on it, a sheet of paper on it, and it'll transfer. So that's what led me to trying out all these water-based materials. So you could use an All Stabilo pencil, an All Stabilo crayon, or I am also in love with the Caran d'Ache crayons. And I get these are 40 different colors, so there's a wonderful range of colors here with that. So we have the plate, we have the pigment, just make sure it's water-based. And then we have to have paper, so I use print paper, which is Reeves BFK. Some people like Arches 88 because it's a water leaf paper, it doesn't have any sizing. I also use Linax 100. And all you have to do if you want to remove the sizing is we do dampen the paper. So we use about 15-20 minutes to dampen the paper to remove the sizing and then to make the paper damp but not wet so it will reconstitute the water-based materials into the print image. Pressure, of course, you need. I've tried hand rubbing with a Baron. This is what a Baron, Japanese Baron that they use for wood cuts. And you could do some rubbings with that, or a back of a peanut butter jar, or a rolling pin, a marble rolling pin. And there are some pins out in the industry that are heavy where they use that. But I still prefer the etching press because I like the fidelity of the work and the sharpness of the work with the etching press. Plus with my method, I have items that need to be embossed. And so it's a lot easier with an etching press to emboss those items. So pressure by hand or with the etching press. Then the porosity of the materials. If your materials are really absorbent, like fabric, it takes a long time to saturate that fabric so it's less, so it'll print more than if it absorbs too much and then it won't print. The other thing is with porosity of materials, maybe some materials you want to seal so it's easier to apply the paint, so you can use acrylic spray on the material that'll seal it. Then you can paint on it and then it'll be easier to lift off the paints or the drawing materials on that plate. So porosity is very important with the types of materials you use. Purpose. What's the purpose of the Monotype? Well, the Monotype is direct, it's quick, it's spontaneous. It gives you a lot of options and you don't have to worry about making a mistake because you just do one over. You know. So it's one of a kind. And it's very direct. It's not a very complicated process like what you do in etching where you're going through all kinds of acid bites and doing all kinds of complicated techniques with that. And of course, some people want to make monotypes because it's, you could sell them a little cheaper than if you were doing a masterpiece on an oil painting or acrylic. So it cuts the cost down. And of course, printmaking is a democratic process. And that's how it got into its existence to sell on a cheaper level. Then personality, I always say that we all have our own signature. Everybody's handwriting is different, and it's the same with the painting process. We all paint differently, we all think differently. So I feel that the personality will come through in the painting process. So my personality comes through with this process that I've kind of evolved over the years called the Monotype Assemblograph, because I assemble my images. I don't treat them like a collograph. A collograph is where you take materials and glue it down for their textural surfaces. Then you ink it up intaglio, which is inking below the surface. And I don't want to get involved with that kind of process. I want it to be more direct and assemble my image and print the surface of the materials that I use. And of course, don't forget you have to have a passion. You really want to be willing to take a risk, be willing to experiment, be willing to explore, and be open to all kinds of possibilities. And every time I go to a store, I say, I wonder if this will work with the Monotype process. You know, maybe I'll buy a plastic template that's used for needlework, or maybe I'll buy a plastic piece that I could do for rubbings, or maybe the string will be a nice texture, or maybe the burlap will print. So, you know, this gives me a chance or an outlet to say, what if? So my thinking is very simple. If the surface can hold the paint, then it'll work for you, okay? And at different levels, you'll actually get an embossed area with the assemblograph. So the assemblograph has a relief surface to it as well, rather than just a planographic flat surface. And in the end, when you think about it, the beauty of Monotype, it's a bridge between drawing, painting, and printmaking. And you can use anything you know about drawing, anything you know about painting and printmaking, and it becomes a unification of one powerful image by bridging all these areas into one idea. The portraits here are demos I had for my class. Here is a straight watercolor Monotype, just out of tube watercolors on plexiglass plate, printed with Reeves BFK paper. I took the ghost, reworked the ghost with water-based crayons, and then from the ghost, I recharged the plate and then added newsprint drop-ins with some drawings using water-based pencils. And then over here is where I embellished it more and started scraping out with one of those nice plastic knives you get at Hardee's, doing some rubbings, doing some fresh newsprint paper drop-ins, using fabric, and using discarded aluminum plates. And so this is basically what I'm going to take you through in my method of doing Monotype assemblographs, which are non-toxic and water-based. This plate here is a ghost from this image. So I took this plate, which I did last fall of 2015, and it had a ghost image on it. I always leave the scum on my plate because I think it gives it a nice patina. The first printing off that plate was this print here that's framed, so you can see how I frame a print. And lower left side at the bottom of the image, I give it a title. Some people put 1/1 or Monotype or nothing in the middle, and on the right they'll use their professional signature with the year that they did the print in. So this print here just came back from the National Arizona Aqueous Show, of which it was juried into, and I'm going to show you this process. And I'm using this ghost image from this plate to see how we can extend the idea. That's one of the beauties of working with monotypes, is you can work sequentially, and the ghost can lead you into another image. Okay? So I have the plastic plexiglass plate, about 1/8 inch thick. And again, the sides are filed about 45-degree angle. And the surface is sanded so the paint would adhere to it and give it a tooth. My paints, as I mentioned, are tube watercolor paints. I use a John Pike palette, so I keep all my paints in order, kind of like a rainbow, you know, from warm colors to cool colors to neutral colors. And I use the tube paints because it gives me a chance to work with fresh paints, even though I have done watercolor monotypes with just out of praying, those old praying school containers. The thing I like about the Pike palette, I also have the lid to it, and the lid becomes my palette as well. Then my water containers, if you frequent restaurants like I do, a friend of mine, these white containers are actually cottage cheese holders, and he cleans them out and he donates them to me to use with my classes. I used to use coffee grind metal containers, but they rusted, so I like the plastic container for the water. I usually have two, one for clean water, one from dirty. Once in a while, I use the Createx fiber reactive dyes, which are really powerful, and they stain a lot. If you get it on your hands, you will have a problem removing it, but it'll disappear after a couple of days. And I usually put that into ice trays. So my liquid fiber reactive dyes are in here. You could actually put tube watercolors in here as well. Then for my broad layout, you could go a painterly approach, which is with brushes directly, or I've lately tried to combine both the painterly approach or using the roller, which this is a foam roller called Rouleur, and I use these plastic palettes. They're like cookie sheets. I use the white surface so I could see my color, and I just squared on the monoprint Createx color on there. If I mix it with a little bit of base, the color will stay on top of the surface of the print. If I don't, it'll get absorbed into the paper. And then I just roll my color on this palette like such. If I want to make it a little more opaque, I can use baby powder as long as it doesn't have any starch in it. You might have a little bit of fragrance so you could smell good when you make your art. So I add the baby powder to make this a little bit opaque. And then I'll just roll on my color onto the plate to get a field of color. And as you can see here, this is the other advantage of using a plexiglass plate, is you can see on the back what that looks like, what you're doing, and see that in reverse. And then you can turn it around and look at it here. So I like to think about the density of my paints, which seems opaque, which seems transparent. And as I did with the diagram on the wall up there on the top, the watercolors tend to be more opaque, and the Createx Monotype colors tend to be more transparent. And the dyes, of course, are very powerful, as I'd mentioned. So now I have the matrix of my image. And if you're not a freewheeling experimental risk taker like I am, again, as I mentioned, you could put a drawing underneath here on a white sheet of paper, put the plate on it, and you can use that as a guideline for making your images. Over here on the left, you can use, there's different tablets out there in the field. Drenwell's multimedia vellum paper is good for Createx, and you can cut this into any shape and use those as a drop-in. Or you can use graphics, Duralar for cutting up and holding water-based materials. So you can buy acetate alternatives that will hold liquid materials and not just certain dry materials. But I get a lot of mileage out of just using newsprint. Newsprint prints well, and it's easy to remove from the press. Sometimes I'll forget I have a piece on the print, and 2 days later, when the print's dry, I look at it and I go, there's something wrong with that corner, and I find out my newsprint's still on there, and I could just peel it off with ease. So that's why I like the newsprint, and it's very thin. Some of the materials you use, like aluminum lithoplates, have a little thickness to them, but I like the thickness because it'll create a little white halo around that drop-in on the print. So here I took this aluminum lithoplate, which is not being used for lithography, of course, and then I've taken this Caran d'Ache crayons that I love to choose from and crayoned the pattern I wanted, the rainbow pattern, so I have yellow and purple here, with the idea of dropping it in on my image here on the plate. So I do know, because it has a thickness, it will have a white line around it. Okay. Newsprint won't have that white line. So I have, this is newsprint with the Caran d'Ache, and I'm going to place that close to like the original image I have, and it's going to come in from the center. And I picked the warm color so it'll be a little more intense against the background. Now granted, remember, I do not know if that surface in the background is going to print. It probably will if I use a lot of pressure, because that's been on the plate for, you know, a couple months, maybe more than that. Then I rolled purple here, and I love these little plastic squeegees because they have the different spacing of these lines here. So while that was wet, I took and squeegeed this line pattern right across. So rather than trying to draw each line separately, I found that Bondo, this is a Bondo thing. You could scrape out some broad white areas, or you can use these little rubber sprayers or scrapers, or you can even use mat board and pull on the surface for lines and so forth. Then I took newsprint and corrugated cardboard, and this is the corrugated cardboard, and I put newsprint on top, and I used the Caran d'Ache crayons, and you just rub across that surface. Some call it rubbings, some call it frottage, but I'm getting a surface of texture. So imagine with the monotypes, the amount of surfaces you can get from the environment that would be interesting to see as prints. So I have this in mind, and I wanted to place that right here on this. So right now I notice that these are blank, and I'm not sure if I want that blank under there. So what I might do is use my roller and just roll some more paint over this area here. The Createx Monotype pigment. Like such. Then I can put this on top, position it where I want it. So this is newsprint with the Caran d'Ache shape on top, the rubbing on top. Then I did another newsprint using the Caran d'Ache, and I'm going to put that here. And when I was rubbing, I had this little white edge I picked up from being on top of a newsprint. So I'm incorporating that white edge. That goes along with this white edge that I created by, sometimes if you need a straight line, you can use a quarter rounder piece of wood and place this down as such, and then pull this sharpened stick there, and I get that white line. Other times you can use plexiglass, cut out old pieces of discarded plexiglass as your guide, and you can actually see through them to see what's going on. So I've got this in place. See, as you can see, I'm assembling my image rather than just painting it. You could do direct monotypes without assembling, but this is my working method I wanted to share with you. Then I had this T here, and I'm not sure where I'm going to put that. Maybe over here. The other thing I like about assembling the image is I deal with space. So a lot of my work has to do with shallow space and deep space, and when things overlap, you definitely say where that space is on a flat image. And if you notice, this is a T. So I found a page of the alphabet, and you can use the negative space of the alphabet, or you can use the positive space of the alphabet and see them as beauties in themselves as shapes and not necessarily letters. So I'm going to place that there. And then over here on this side, I have string, and I've painted the string with straight pigment, and since watercolor tends to be more opaque than the Createx, I used the watercolor, and mostly pigment, less water, and I'm going to use that to wrap around this aluminum line I have created here, so it's part of this illusion of the bar going through the string, and it plays off of what this rubbing is. This is a watercolor shaper. It has a rubber tip, and I use that to wipe out the pigment here for the white area. And then I came back with a round brush and dipped into this liquid fiber reactive dye and painted this kind of infinity shape here, or H shape. So now I've got a nice assortment of techniques used here to express this kind of gestural quality in the work. And then this one, again, is newsprint using Caran d'Ache. I put that there. Then I had the good fortune of finding these things for fabric. They're plastic templates. And with the plastic templates, you've got all kinds of interesting patterns that you can use. Or you can use the needlework plastic piece here, which I did. So I took newsprint paper, placed it on there, like such. Then I used a black Caran d'Ache pencil, and I rubbed, that's this pencil here, it's not Caran d'Ache, excuse me, all Stabilo, Schwan all Stabilo black pencil, and I rubbed it to get this pattern. You can also do that with these plastic ribbons I found from Ben Franklin, and all I have to do is just put the ribbon down, put the newsprint down, and rub, and get a whole texture from that ribbon, that plastic ribbon. They come in different shapes. I tended to like the circular shapes, so I have that as a rubbing too. And you can also take a sponge. Sponges have textures, and you could wet the sponge, stamp it with the watercolors, and you could stamp in your image as such if you want to do that as well. I have this real fine string, and if I want a white line without having to draw it, I can just throw the string down and hope for the best. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to put it here, and then I'm going to take this fabric that I painted, and I'm hoping that with this fabric cut in these interesting shapes that I can play off that white line and this other shape going on. And again, if it doesn't work out for you, at least it gives you an idea of what works, what doesn't work, and it'll feed into the next work. If you get lucky, it gives you more information to work with or to deal with. So now I've got a couple things going here. I think I'm going to live with this. I hope it works. And then up here on that print I showed you, I have this little fabric piece. So the ghost is there, so I'm going to put the non-ghost on top of it and see if I can play off of that to make it more interesting. So I'll put this here. I don't want it to run off the page. Almost looks like a stingray coming in now. And sometimes a lot of my work alludes to nature without actually being nature. And of course, art is all about life experiences. And it's almost like an autobiography. It kind of reflects your life. It's like a self-portrait. Then I'll put this one here on top. And so as you see, it's a slow process that evolves. All my elements are dry. I call these elements, or as another term I used, this is my vocabulary. And yeah, since I collect cigar boxes, my vocabulary is kept in a cigar box. So I speak with my vocabulary using these elements and in assembling the image to make something new out of something that was discarded or might be considered capable of being printed. Now I'm at that point where I have to decide, is it finished, is it ready to go? And the key to the monotype assemblograph process is you want to make sure everything is bone dry. It has to be bone dry. If it's wet, you're going to get stuff running across. If it's too dry, real dry, like if you use a hair dryer, it might just glue it to the plexiglass where it won't print. If you use paint too thickly, it acts like a glue. So you don't want to have paint too thick. You don't want to have your drop-ins too thick, because then again you might rip the paper, or if it's too high, it only prints that and not what's on the planograph area of the plexiglass. Let's see, this one I did is a strong red. Just want to make sure what side you put the things on. So I'm going to shoot that right here next to the T. And that gives it a punch, and you have this kind of staccato effect going, a kind of a rhythm going with this. This moves into the page, and this kind of points down here, and this is moving in this way. So then the next question is, am I finished, or is there something else that I can do with this? These are all the same size, so maybe I might introduce, using this stencil I found, maybe I might paint in 3 of those circles there. So and I use bristle brushes because they hold paint and they're easy to manipulate. When I do the dye part, I use the soft-haired brushes. But again, it's a matter of preference when you work, which one you like best. Yeah, and I don't use black. Remember, the whites come from the white of the paper or from the white of the plate. I don't use white paint. For some reason, maybe it's the watercolor in me. And the same with black. I don't use straight black. Createx does sell straight black. But I find if I mix my blacks, I get a better range of blacks in my work and a little richer. So I use ultramarine blue, and burnt sienna gives me a nice black or dark color. Sometimes you can throw in phthalo green. So using that as a stencil, and then I sharpen the back of my brushes so I can draw with them. And then this one is, I want to bring the eye into the image by doing such. Repeating these smaller circles in here. And then drawing. Then I lift it as such. If you don't like it, you could like I like that little smudge part, maybe I'll just take my finger and smudge. I like that little gesture going that way, and I could do it this going the other way if I want. Then again, if I don't like it, I can go back and do another one on top of that. Maybe for variety, I can do just an X. Like X marks the spot. Maybe here, since I could make that look like it's behind it, so I can draw a circle here and stop at the edge, like such. You're only limited by your own imagination. The fun part is explore the materials, think about what's available, look around the environment, look in stores, anything that will hold paint, anything that will hold a water-based crayon can be printed. If you have to seal the material, use spray acrylic gloss that will seal the material. And then again, when you're ready to go, this has to be absolutely dry. Then we're going to take the plate over to the press, and I will show you how to register the plate so everything's straight on the press. And then we'll go through that dampening process. The print, or the monotype, can only be as big as your press bed for an etching press if you're using an etching press. And I have this wonderful new etching press that we acquired, Garfield Press, Tatchet Garfield Press. I use the 3-blanket method. Each blanket has a purpose. So the first blanket is the thinnest blanket. It's called the size catcher. So if there's anything left over from the paper in terms of sizing, it catches that sizing. The second blanket is very important. It's the cushion blanket. So if I have drop-ins, it'll cushion those drop-ins and create those nice halos around there and the embossment of the relief technique. And then the pusher blanket basically is to help on the wear and tear of the roller and maintenance. So I have the 3 blankets. I have these micro dials. There's an old saying, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So if I want to tighten the pressure, I'll go to the right, and they have little markings here where I can make sure the left side is the same pressure as the right side. It does not have to be as much pressure as one would do for an etching. So, what I usually do is take a clean plate, put a clean plate here on the press bed, put a clean newsprint on it, and I'll run it through to test for the plate mark. And if I see the plate mark, then I say I've got enough pressure. And I've already done that, so you don't have to observe that. I have my plate, and you want to make sure the image is straight on your paper. So on this press bed, I made a template, a registration system that I use. And on the system, it talks about the large paper, and it talks about the plate, and it's made for large plates and smaller plates. So I'm going to take my plate and put it right here where the plate is supposed to be, and I line it up so it's relatively straight. And as you can see, now I have nice even borders around for putting the paper on. Now, let me remind you, I am really taking a risk on this demo because I haven't touched that plate since last fall, and it's just like this is the first time I'm doing this monotype with this plate. If you work constantly every day in the studio, there's a motion going on where you feel the temperature, you feel the dampness, you feel what's going to print, what's not going to print, and your success rate is very high. But since this is kind of like cold turkey starting over again, there's no guarantee, but that's the beauty of the monotype. If it doesn't work, you can go back and do it again. You can throw it away. It's not like doing months of painting on a canvas. So I apologize if this doesn't come out, but I'm hoping it will. All right, so now I mentioned you need damp paper to reconstitute water-based materials. So I have it in the sink over here. My paper is soaking. I use Reeves BFK. It's a cotton-based paper. It's mold-made. It's archival. And it should, for Reeves BFK, it should soak for about 20 minutes or more. And I think it's been soaking for an hour. So, and you can use, if you don't have a sink, you can use the plastic. You can use the plastic photo trays and then just put that on a table and put water in it, and you can soak your paper that way. And there's different ways of blotting paper. Some people have used actual blotters. Some have used newsprint, and some, what I'm using is 100% cotton towel. So if you get really dirty, you can take a bath with it, but actually I'm using it for dampening the paper, so forget the bath idea. The other thing I use sometimes your hands get dirty, and there are printers that use gloves. I've never gotten the habit of using gloves. Or you can put an invisible glove on your hand, and then when you're done for the day, you can wash it off. But we have what we call paper tabs, and I keep getting these infinity plastic cards in the mail for some kind of advertising for TV or something. Anyway, I just fold them up, and these become great paper tabs. And so you don't have to dirty your paper. If your hands are dirty, you just keep your fingers on the outside, and on the inside, the paper is always clean. So you lift up the paper with the tabs, and you make sure it's done all its crying. So once it stops dripping or crying, we can put it on the towel for blotting. Paper has a trademark or a watermark, and I usually print on the side of the watermark. So this is Reeves BFK, so that's where it will be printed on. So I take my nice new Walmart white bath towel, and blot the excess water off. It should not have a sheen on it. It should look matte. And then what I do is carry it like such and line it up. Usually I do it on the other side. So this is going to be, I'm going to have to move around in front of the camera. So I line it up as such. And I don't flop it, I just drop it slowly. If I flopped it, it might chase away some of the drop-ins. So that's why I didn't flop it, I just put it to rest. Okay, and there are my plastic tabs. And then to protect the blankets and also to help pick up any excess water, I use newsprint as a buffer. And so the newsprint is placed on top of this good paper. Then I slowly put the size catcher down. The cushion blanket. And I basically, in the studio, I have two sets of blankets, a rough set that's dirty that I could do a lot of proofing with. And then if I do a series, I have a real fine set, so it doesn't have all the ink on it and that. So my microdials are 7 on top and 3 marks on the bottom on the left side and on the right side. So what you want is when you move the handle and the press bed goes through, you want a little resistance so you know that you're getting pressure. It should, when it hits the plate edge, then it should resist a little, but you don't want to force it, okay? So then I just crank it, make sure it's moving in the right direction. See, here's the resistance, so I think I may have enough resistance. And then I'll move on slowly. And then you'll know when you get off the plate because there'll be a little release. Now it's off. So I go to the end. Okay. Now the plate's gone through the press. and I'll slowly remove the blankets. And as you can see, the newsprint here is crinkled up, so that means it was wet underneath, so that's good. And you can see some paints bleed, and so this caught the bleed on the newsprint paper, which will be discarded. And I'll get a cleaner newsprint, so when I peel this print, I can put it on there and study it. So I usually like to peel from the corner and peel slowly the print. In case there's something that sticks, then I have to readjust it. So now that I've peeled it off, I can look at it on a clean sheet of paper, and I can look at my plate and see if anything came off or if it's still on the plate. So you could see here is the newsprint of the rubbing, so that's still on the plate. I can remove that and throw that away. This plastic I can use over and over again, so that's not thrown away. And this is newsprint, so that can be removed and thrown away. The fabric I can still use, so I take that off and use that over. Same with this fabric. And I'll use that over, and then there's string. I'll use that over. And then this is the aluminum plate. I'll use that. So now I have a ghost again that I can start with making a print again. But as you can see over here on this plate, there is that hide and seek again. As I mentioned, sometimes you forget what's on the plate and you kind of have to remember what's there. The dye, fiber active dye, came out very well. It's really strong, and I like the interplay of the lines here. But you notice I've got fabric here, so now I got to peel it off the paper. So that's there. That can be used again. And I did take the string off the plate, so this is just the remnants of that string, which beautifully plays between a kind of a hide and seek aspect of the image. And here's where I'm saying that here's a newsprint that didn't come off, but now I can peel it off slowly. And that was with the Caran d'Ache. And that's, you throw the newsprint papers away, you don't use them over and over again. And then this one, that's why I have these here. This tool helps me take them away. Now, sometimes if the paper's still wet and like there might be a white spot here I don't want, I can get the crayon and I can go back into it while it's still wet and just touch up that one area I'm bothered with, so I don't want that white to show. So while it's wet and damp, I can still do that and it'll still look homogeneous. It'll still look like it's still part of the print. And I look and see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, there's another one. See what I mean? It's like hunt and seek. Whoops. But there's an excitement about finding it and then peeling it off, and then you see, wow, look at that. It turned out beautifully with that. I don't think I have any more drop-ins that are hiding from me, but I find that the newspaper just works beautifully on a lot of this. And you can try this on different papers and that. So that's the final print, the Monotype assembly graph, using my method. an approach to doing a one-of-a-kind print. You can see I still have a ghost from the first ghost, and I have a ghost from the second ghost. So the next time I work on this, I can decide how I want to create a nice spatial interplay between these elements, and if I want to add something new to it. So that's why I never clean off my plate, ever, because I like this texture. That's the only way I can get this texture in this print is from that scum or residual I left from the last print, which if I didn't have it, it wouldn't be that interesting for the surface. Now, for drying, what I usually do is take the print, put a clean sheet of newsprint underneath, and then I have 2 heavy drying boards, and all I do is put another newsprint on top, clean newsprint, after all the elements have been removed. And let that set for a couple of days, and it should dry relatively flat. I know there's some printmakers that staple it all the way around on the walls with 60, 70 staples, but I find this method works just as well. And then I just put this on top. And if I want to add more weight, I can add more weight, but I want a little bit of air to go through it too, and it will dry flat in a day or so. Again, if you don't want to store your vocabulary in a cigar box because they're hard to find, you can use a freezer bag, Ziploc bag, and just put all your elements in a Ziploc bag for storage, especially the ones that can be reusable. So some of my work that are personal to me that uses this process of making water-based, non-toxic, monotype assemble graphs, assemble meaning they're not glued down. These are 2 that represent me, and that shows you some of the stuff I showed you today. Again, aluminum metal plates for the line was used here. Regular string was used here. And then if I wanted a pattern, I just take this plastic pattern and put paper on it and rub it with a newsprint, and that created this circle right here. And if you know anything about printmaking, intaglio printmaking, you could take a piece of paper, use a polymer gloss medium or gel medium, let it dry, spray it with acrylic spray to seal it. Then you can ink it, and then like intaglio, you only wipe the surface, and the ink that's below the surface will print. So this was a little piece I did that created this little bit of intaglio piece right here on that. And then again, you can use a rubber squeegee to get the white areas, or you can use the white string that would act as a stencil because you want that area to be white. Here is the fabric I used and tore out the fabric so I could play with this kind of figure ground relationship in the work. Again, the aluminum plates, and then a piece of paper with a drop-in, and then some scraping, and then some drawing with a regular wooden stylus, or you can sharpen the back of your brush and use that as a way of wiping that out. And then this was corrugated cardboard down here. So that'll give you a sampling of what I do as an artist. And then if you want to find out anything more about my work, I had the good fortune of being on the cover of Monotype by Julia Ayres. And the cover reminds me that you can also do some airbrushing, water-based airbrushing on the plate. So this pink area is all airbrushed. And then if you want to read a little bit, a couple pages of my work is in here that talks about embossing materials. So this would be a good reference for monotypes and then referring to my work. So I thank you for taking the time to watch my demo, and I enjoy feedback, so feel free to write me and offer your thoughts, and hopefully I'll do another one. Have a good day.